My name is Rich Carson. I'm a ex kind of 30-year manager, consultant, and academic. And I specialize in the area of organizational change management. And that really what I'm here to talk about is the book. It's called The Book of Change, and it's on the web at bookofchange.com. It really spells out a process for doing organizational change management, both for private sector, public sector, and nonprofits.
Hi, I'm Mark Banicevich. Welcome to Governance Bites. Today,
Thanks.
I have the privilege again to speak to Rich Carson. Rich, thank you very much again for your time. Our topic today is why most change initiatives fail. We're going to talk about common traps that leaders fall into and how to shift towards people-centered strategies. I really appreciate your time again. Thank you so much. You mentioned the Book of Change and that it's available. You've got bookofchange.com and they can get in touch with you for a PDF copy of that. To start with, in your experience, what are the most common traps that executive teams and boards fall into when they're planning and executing change?
Well, the biggest problem is that boards are made up of people and they come with their own preconceptions about what needs to change. And what they think needs to change and what actually needs to happen may not be the same thing. So the biggest problem I have had is that getting people to understand that when they come to this process may not be exactly what they thought. The other problem in terms of some boards is they hire consultants for this to kind of do their dirty work. In other words, they hire you and they say, look, we want you to do this. So they don't really want a thoughtful process to kind of divine what the issues are. They just want you to do, to make a bunch of recommendations that they want because they don't want to look like they're the bad guys. The same thing with potentially the CEO or executive director. So those are the two biggest problems in terms, if you don't understand what the issues really are, then it's going to fail. I think McKinsey, the consulting firm, actually said that something like 70% of change management initiatives fail. And it's really because either it is a failure right from the very start, or they don't deliver, they don't provide adequate resources, timelines, and bottom line accountability in terms of implementing the recommendations. It's one thing to just say, well, look, here's the problem, here's what you folks need to do, and then kind of throw it on the shelf, or just pay lip service to it, or not really provide the adequate resources to implement it. One of the things that really, I personally think needs to happen and doesn't always happen is that once you've got the recommendations down, you know what you need to do, you can't do everything at once. And if you do it through a strategic plan and multi-year budgeting, you can kind of prioritize what you need to do now and what you need to do tomorrow and next day. And that way you can also make, you have to assign real accountability to people and say, okay, we'll give you the resources, we'll give you the timeline, and we're gonna make sure this happens.
Mm-hmm. Yes, right. Moving on to the board, how should a board's governance structure support and oversee change initiatives rather than hinder them?
Well, I think the most important thing is to have somebody who's kind of a person who is responsible for overseeing this on behalf of the board. It's one thing that you want to do that if the board wants to do that with the CEO or the executive director, but it's nice to have continuity on the board itself and have people on there, a person or persons who really understand, have gone through the change management process. So it's not something, foreign to them. So I think having somebody on on the board that actually understands that is good. It's also really important to educate the board. Change management is really a fairly new profession. It started post 1947 with Kurt Lewin as the actual kind of a field of study in consulting. So I think it's really important to educate a board in terms of what the change management process and to manage their expectations.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Can you share an example of a time when a board's oversight directly prevented a change from failing? You've been on a number of boards yourself, particularly in the non-profit sector. You've consulted to boards. So an example of when a board's oversight directly stopped a failure.
I was on a board. I was fairly new, and they wanted they asked me and another person to do a change management process, and what happened is they were so offended by the recommendations that they didn't do anything, and what bothered them was we basically said, look, first of all, your board's too big. You need to really narrow it down in terms of fewer voting members. And you can still have these other people doing whatever they were doing before, but you really need to narrow that down. And the other thing was really term limits. We talked about term limits, and the fact, I'm a big fan of term limits because boards tend to stagnate over time. You get the same people with the same ideas over and over and over, and they're not going to change their minds necessarily. If you bring new people on board, really, it could be people you bring on people on in terms of what trends have changed. But I think term limits are important, and they found that offensive too. So basically, we put a lot of time and effort and thought into the change management document, and they just ignored it. And basically, they told me, they said, "Look, we don't want you to publish this anywhere." They didn't want it to. In other words, they didn't want anybody to ever know what it said.
How big was the board when you started the process?
Well, it was probably about 10 people.
And what was the size you recommended?
Oh, probably down to 5.
Right.
Five voting members. Everybody could maintain their same job. Basically, you needed a president-elect, secretary, a treasurer, and I forget what the 5th person was. But those are the basic board essentials of any board. Those are the basic functions. You can have a lot of add-ons depending on what the board's if it's the board of, you have people who do programming, things like that. So
right.
Anyway, they went nowhere.
Right. Yes, I've been in a similar situation where you're trying to educate a board around what governance is, what their job is, and the struggle with trying to get heard and stop people from simply just doing management tasks that they've been doing forever.
Well, and if you're not if you're not an echo chamber in terms of what they want, that can be problematic too. Like I said, a lot of times they're hiring you to do what they want and not necessarily what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And that's personally, that's not something I'm really interested in.
It's interesting that the structure that you talked about, very traditional structure of a president-elect, secretary. There's been a movement in New Zealand sport, for example, away from that traditional model to a more corporate style board of directors, where you've just got 5, 7 directors. They're all directors. That's their job. Somebody is the chair of the board, and all the other administrative roles fall inside the organization. So the secretarial role falls inside the organization. They're not a board role.
Sure.
So yeah, there is a bit of change in that space. What's the primary reason leaders fail to get buy-in from employees during a change initiative?
Well, first and foremost, they don't care what they think. I have worked with CEOs and executive directors who are very dictatorial, and like I said, either a board or the CEO, executive director person wants you to put together a report in terms of what they want, and basically, if they're not sincere in terms of empowering, involving the staff, or either internally or existentially, vendors, customers, etc., then they're not going to get a good product. If they think they know what the problem is, that's the first problem, because maybe they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, if you have a board, and like I said, you bring new people on, and they basically come in with an agenda that they think something needs to happen, whether it's rational or irrational, whether it's going to be profitable or not. So the biggest issue for me is always to convince the board and let's say the leadership, to convince the leadership to involve everybody, all the stakeholders. They can always reject what they're hearing, but if they involve all the stakeholders, first of all, it gets rid of this resistance to change. If you go to somebody and say, you're going to do this, like I said, their response is usually, well, we always did it this way. Why would we do that? But if you go to them and if you go to anybody and ask their opinion, they're flattered. Yes. And go to the staff and ask their opinion, and get their buy-in, involve them in the process. You'll not only get a better product, but that actually will get implemented.
Well, from a board perspective, then, what governance mechanisms can be put in place to ensure that those change strategies are people-centered, as you say? What can you put into the governance structure to say, this is how we do things around here? When we want change, we need to have the people involved.
Well, are you talking in terms of what you do with the board, or how you implement it?
Yeah, what you do with the board, how you put something in place so that the board will do the right things around involving the team.
Well, like I said, I mean, you get them to kind of put their money where their mouth is and create a strategic plan and do multi-year budgeting. And once that's in place, basically they live with it. It's their, I mean, they take ownership of the plan and the budgeting, which is their job, and make it official.
As a board of directors with a CEO and a management team, how can the board then ensure that the CEO and the management team are focused on that human element of change? As a board, you're getting together once a month, once every 6 weeks, you're discussing things. You might have the CEO, some of the other members of the management team coming into the room. You're not necessarily talking directly to staff. How can you ensure that they're focused on that human element?
Well, a couple ways. Number one is know who you're hiring. Okay, just to start with, if your biggest opportunity to get it right is to hire the right person who understands that is important. Secondarily, if you've got a person who basically is the problem, you need to basically make them understand that they're accountable to the board, and they need to either. I had one of the people that worked for me, basically, when I explained this process to them, he said, well, he said, I don't necessarily agree with you. He goes, but I can tell that you're either on the train or off the train. And he's right. Either I had people that were not on the train and eventually had to, phase them out of their positions because they either didn't get it or didn't want to implement it for one reason or another. So either you hire the right people who understand that involving employees is an important aspect of their job, or bring them around to understanding that that is the expectation.
Right. Yeah, great. Thank you. What metrics should a board be looking at to measure the success of people-centered change?
Well, you can use several things. One is you can do surveys of both internally and externally of staff and of vendors, customers, et cetera, et cetera. You can do focus groups of any of those on a regular basis. Or finally, you can actually sit down with work groups. Let's say once a year, you have the board has a luncheon with a particular work group and just talks about, and maybe the manager's there or not there, but I mean, they basically talk about how things are going, how they feel about making these changes, how are they successful or not. So there's different tools you can use that a board can use to connect with the line staff. What either it's, through, like I said, surveys where you can actually measure performance. You can measure perceptions over time too, just like you can measure cost.
Right. Right. So one is by collecting data to report up to the board, which is the idea of your surveys. And the other way is by creating mechanisms for having the board actually talk to people within the business and find out how things are going. Yeah, great.
Yeah, it's what gets measured gets done. And if the CEO, executive director knows that the board is tracking these things, tracking perceptions, tracking cost, it makes that person accountable, and they can go back to that person and say, well, look, okay, you're doing really well here. It's not just a matter of my opinion. We've got metrics, and you're doing well here, and you're doing well here, but not so well over here. Metrics are really, really important, both perceptually or in reality in terms of cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. How can a board foster a culture of open communication to address employee concerns, particularly during periods of significant change? So how do you get a culture in an organization, and how does the board create this culture of having employees being able to raise their hand and saying, hey, I've got a problem here?
There's a lot of different ways. Some that are, kind of more obvious than others. I mean, you could actually create a newsletter, in terms of that puts, you could have a regular newsletter that goes out, say, monthly or quarterly, that has information from not just from the executive director, CEO, or departments, but also from the board. One of the things I did that was when you walked into my offices, on one wall, I had you've seen org charts, right? Well, I had a massive org chart of the entire organization with a picture of every person in it with their name and their title, and it showed what group they were in. And it would change over time as people got promoted, people came on, people left. But things like that create a sense of group, that you belong to something. And it was nice if you were a new person in my organization, you could go over to the board and figure out who was who.
Yeah, that'd be really helpful.
Because you don't, you're in an organization of 165 people. You don't have a clue what's going on from day one. So there's a lot of things that a board can do like that, that really creates a sense of group, a sense of belonging. And the other is, just like I said, it's a great deal depends on the people you hire to make sure that, one of the things that I found that it's really important as a manager is being a good listener. I had a boss once, and I would be talking to him, and he would stop and say, he would say, "You're not listening." just shut up and listen. I'm going to tell you something. So as a manager or a board, you need mechanisms so that people know that you are listening to what they're saying. Because a lot of times, if it's a very top-down organization, you're just told what to do, and like your opinion doesn't matter. So actually, like I said, focus groups, surveys, get-togethers. There's a lot of ways to help people not only feel like they're part of something, but actually have a voice.
Mm-hmm. Yes. How can a board effectively challenge management on a change initiative that appears to be too top down, something where it's being dictated from the top rather than, as you're saying, you've got to get the people involved at all levels of the organization?
There's a couple things you do. The toughest is replace people. It sounds pretty callous, but a lot of times you've got people that are in the wrong position. They don't have the aptitude. It's kind of like the Peter principle. I mean, they may have got promoted to a position that they're not adequate. They're not able to even handle. So that's another way. Of course, you can do provide people with where people lack skills. You can provide them with training, and not as a punishment, but I mean, basically, if somebody is serious about growth as a professional, as a manager, then managers are not necessarily born; they're created, and if you provide them with adequate training. There's all kinds of the thing with training is if people perceive it as kind of like you're bad, you've done something wrong, so we're going to send you to the work education camp, then it's not going to work. But if people really embrace it like as personal growth, then and they really get into it, then that works great.
Yeah, cool thing. I've got one final question for you. In your governance career, you've been on a number of boards, particularly in the not-for-profit space. What's the best governance advice you've received?
That I've received? Well, I think, like I said, one of them was, to be a better listener than a talker. That was personally, I mean, I'm fairly glib, so I got that lesson from not only a boss at one time who told me to shut up and listen, but I got that advice from my wife, who basically told me, "Look, I'm not here to debate this. Like, I want you to listen to what I have to say." So, that probably is the most important lesson I've learned personally. The other is where and this is true in terms of CEOs or executive directors, where you are not strong, where you need help, get help. Like I said, I put my human resource person in the office next to me because I felt that I needed a sounding board when talking about cultural empowerment, when talking about staff issues, do's and don'ts, that kind of thing. So where you need to get a strength and find somebody that complements you.
Awesome. Richard, thank you very much again for your time.
Yeah.
I want to just note again that your website's bookofchange.com.
Yes.
And the PDF of the book is available. If they can't find it on the website, they can get in touch with you and get a copy of the PDF to read.
Yes.
In our previous conversation, we talked about the 3 E's model of change, which was really interesting in itself. So I'll look forward to catching up again soon.
All right.
And seeing you next episode.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for watching this episode of Governance Bites. We have more episodes on YouTube and your favorite podcast channel, where I interview directors and experts on various topics relating to boards of directors and governance. We'd love to see you back, and please like, subscribe, and share the videos and podcasts.